All right, so Donald J. Trump, Big Daddy Trump over here, just did a interview with Tucker Carlson, one of the most prominent right-wing white nationalist propagandists in the entire United States. And this interview had a bunch of different gems within it. Of course, here tweeted out by Aaron Rupar, some of the highlights here. So I just wanted to go through some of these clips here with you guys just to get a sense of like where is Donald Trump at right now. What are we looking at for the 2024 prospects? Presumably he's going to be the candidate. We've seen a couple people throw their hats in the rings. We got Nikki Haley, we got Tim Scott just joined the game a couple of days ago, and so he's facing a little bit of challenges, but it still seems like Donald Trump is going to be the Republican nominee unless he drops dead and dies in the next couple of months. But so we got this interview just giving us an insight in terms of where Donald Trump is right now, especially as he has been facing all of this legal trouble from the Manhattan DA and of course the ongoing Georgia case and a bunch of other cases as well that have been brought against the former president. So here to start us off with this Tucker Carlson interview, we got this clip of him basically describing the situation as he was going in and being officially arrested and arraigned during this ongoing Stormy Daniels hush money payment case. Okay, now keep in mind, before we get into this, that Tucker Carlson, according to some of those leaked texts that we got as a result of the Dominion lawsuit being brought against Fox News for perpetuating the lies surrounding the 2020 election supposedly being rigged, Tucker Carlson basically was exposed for being an absolute Donald Trump hater. Okay, he hates Donald Trump, apparently, at least according to these communications behind the scenes, just as much as any Democrat might hate Donald Trump, right? Said that he was like a demonic force in the world. So that's who we're talking about here, Tucker Carlson. Now he's got a little bit of a change of tone in these interviews here. So let's just go ahead and jump into this real quick.
And I'll tell you, people were crying. People that work there, professionally work there, that have no problems putting in murderers, and they see everybody. It's tough place. And they were crying. They were actually crying. They said, I'm sorry. They'd say, 2024, sir, 2024. And tears are pouring down their eyes. I've never seen anything like those people are phenomenal. Those are your police.
Yep.
Those are the people that work at the courthouse. They're unbelievable people. Many of them were in tears or close to it. Many apologists were sorry, sir. We're sorry. They had,
Okay, so, I mean, listen, on the one hand, it's like, okay, we know the statistics, at least back in 2016, like an overwhelming majority, something like 70+% of police officers within the United States were Donald Trump supporters. So I wouldn't be surprised if some of the people who were crossing paths with him during this entire process, were big Donald Trump fans. But that's how he's starting off this interview. He's talking about how he was going in to be arraigned and people were just, the tears were, smearing down their eyes. And they were heartbroken and they were telling him, we just want you to win in 2024. That's how he's characterizing this entire situation. Maybe it's true. Maybe it's just a delusional fantasy that Donald Trump happened to have in the moment. But that's how they started out this interview. Now we get to more of the actual interesting stuff here. Okay, so first I want to get to this clip, right? This is Donald Trump's take on how he basically views Vladimir Putin and the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine. Of course, Donald Trump has previously said that he would somehow be able to magically end the war in Ukraine within 24 hours. That's a direct quote right there. 24 hours of him being in power. So let's just hear how he characterizes this ongoing situation here.
May I ask, you talked to Putin about Ukraine. What did you say to him?
I could see that he loved it. And I said...
he loved Ukraine.
He considers it to be a part of Russia.
Yeah.
I said, not when I'm president. We had a very good relationship. Look, I was the worst thing that ever happened to him. I closed up his pipeline. You never heard the words Nord Stream 2 until I came along. Nord Stream 2 was their pipeline. And I had a great relationship with him, but it was very tough because they had a fake Russia investigation. And I told him, and he told me, he said, it's very hard for us to deal, don't you think? I said, very hard. Because we have a fake investigation that turned out to be a fake. For 2 years it went on.
Okay, so that's basically his take, I guess, on the ongoing war in Ukraine, is that somehow Vladimir Putin loves Ukraine or something. Kind of a weird way to put it when he just invaded this country, and this war has resulted in tens of thousands of deaths on either side. I mean, you could have differing perspectives in terms of like what is the like original starting point of what led to this war taking place in the first place, but the idea that like Vladimir Putin like loves Ukraine, and I mean, I guess it's true that he thinks that Ukraine is like sort of part of his jurisdiction in some sense. That's what we saw in some of his early speeches at the outset of the war, sort of like a blood and soil type of speech coming from Putin. But I mean, it's just kind of weird to see somebody who used to be the president, who was also supplying Ukraine with weapons to presumably fight against Russia, especially over in the eastern portions of the Donbass before the actual Russian invasion. This same guy is now turning around and pretending as if Vladimir Putin loves Ukraine, and that's why he invaded Ukraine, and somehow he's completely shifted his position on defending Ukraine, and that now he's, I guess, in favor of what exactly? I mean, again, a lot of this is just not really clear specifically what his policy positions on this war actually are. And I mean, again, you could have tons of different disagreements about the strategy, the lack of a push for diplomacy, and all of that good stuff. But it seems like he just doesn't have an actual coherent policy in place, and he just kind of wants people to trust him at face value that if he was in power, he would be able to end the war. And this is going to tie in to a couple different later clips here where he basically insinuates that he threatened Putin and China with nuking those two various countries if they were to take action on Ukraine or Taiwan respectively in those various countries under his authority. So we're going to get to that here in a second, but I want to get into this clip as well here, because this is Donald Trump basically identifying what he thinks is the biggest threat to the United States. Is it any of our foreign adversaries that he has, obviously continued in perpetuating our adversarial stance towards these countries, or is it something else? Okay, so here's Donald Trump's perspective on that.
I often say, they said to me the other day, one of your fellow journalists said, who's the biggest problem, sir? Is it China? Could it be Russia? Could it be North Korea? No, I said the biggest problem is from within. It's these sick, radical people from within, because we can handle, if we're smart, we can handle Russia, China. I did. I took in billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars from China. No other president took in anything, and they respected me. He's the same thing, I told him, you can't go into Taiwan. You can't do it. I won't tell you exactly what I said, but it was something that probably a lot of people wouldn't like if they heard it, but it was very tough. Don't go into Taiwan. If you do, we're going to have problems. Other than that, we're going to be great relationship. We're going to have a great relationship. And he said to me when I said we're going to do something, if he goes in, no, you wouldn't do it. I'll do that. I swear I'll do that. And he didn't believe me, but he believed me 10%. The same thing with Putin. I said I was going to do something really nasty if he goes into Ukraine. He said, no, you're not going to do that. I said, I will. And he didn't believe me either, but he believed me 10%.
Okay, so if you guys weren't catching on there, basically the implication of what he's saying there is that he was, I guess, behind the scenes threatening China and Russia with presumably nuclear weapons. I mean, this is something we've seen him say before, right? He comes out and he says the N-word, but he's not talking about the actual N-word that people are typically referring to in that kind of a context. He's talking about N-word as in nuclear, okay? And so presumably what he's talking about, and he goes on to sort of expand on this later in the interview, he's talking about presumably threatening these countries behind the scenes with nuking them. Okay, going to all-out World War III nuclear warfare against these countries for taking action in Ukraine or Taiwan, respectively. Okay, that's what he's talking about here. The big anti-war guy, okay, Donald Trump, the big anti-war candidate, according to some people on the right. Okay, that's who we're talking about here. I mean, it's just, it's kind of insane, honestly, what we're talking about. And we didn't even get to the point of what he was actually insinuating there, where he's talking about, no, the threat is not any external threat from all of these various countries, North Korea, Iran, China, Russia, any of these other countries. The threat is actually internal. Now, listen, I would actually agree with that to some extent if you're talking about like the corrupt political class or, you know, the capitalist private sector that is bribing our politicians and driving this country into the ground, I would agree with that analysis, but that's not what he's saying here, right? He's talking about like Joe Biden being a representative of like the Marxist radical left or something like that, and how they are actually the biggest threat to the country internally, I guess. I mean, again, it's kind of like incoherent. I wish that Democrats were more radical than they actually are in reality, but they're not. I mean, we're talking about somebody like Joe Biden, a guy who has been like the most corporatist, the most so-called centrist within the confines of the DC Overton window of any politician throughout his history, you know, in the Senate, under Obama, etc. Now, he's taken like some more, like slightly better stances since he's been the president, but he's not like some Bernie Sanders type politician, right? Not only is he not a Marxist, he's not even like a democratic socialist like Bernie Sanders, but somehow Trump is like, no, the real threat to the United States is actually coming from the radical Marxists like Joe Biden. Okay, now listen, if we get to the other discussions about Russia, China, whatever it may be, especially China, as we're sort of gearing up towards this World War III or, Cold War II electric boogaloo with China as our geopolitical rival on the world stage, I would agree with him if the actual analysis was like, we have no business trying to go to war with this country. Okay, now, obviously, he just said that he was basically implying he was going to nuke China if they went into Taiwan. But, if he was giving the analysis of like, okay, we should try to form good relationships with China, and, we should actually, try to sort out a way that this competition on the world stage can be resolved through peace instead of warfare, that would be one thing, but that's not really what he's implying here, right? He's also considering those countries a threat, just in like a slightly different way, and he thinks that the U.S. Democratic Party is a larger threat from the left to the internal security of the United States. I mean, again, it's kind of incoherent, and it seems like Donald Trump, honestly, watching this interview, has kind of lost a couple steps, okay, as we head into 2024. Obviously, I think that he's consolidating his base around him, especially in the aftermath of some of this like victim complex that he is generating after being prosecuted by the Manhattan DA. He's definitely consolidating within the Republican Party, but this type of shit is just not gonna fly in a general election. So it'll be really interesting to see how this plays out in the long run, okay? But now I want to get to this aspect of it, okay? So this was a clip where he was basically talking about climate change and how I guess he thinks that climate change is kind of sort of fake, but also he's an environmentalist, and also he's talking about like global nuclear warming or something like that. So let's just see what he's got to say about this part.
When I listen to people talking about global warming, that the ocean will rise in the next 300 years by 1/8 of an inch, and they talk about this is our problem. Our big problem is nuclear warming. I mean, nobody even talks about it. The environmentalists talk about all this nonsense in many cases. Look, I'm an environmentalist also, I guess, in my own way, because I've done a good job with the environment, but nobody talks about nuclear. The problem we have, the biggest problem we have in the whole world, it's not global warming, it's nuclear warming.
Okay. So I'm going to be like as good faith as I possibly can in this kind of a situation. I think what he's trying to talk about here is nuclear war, and he's calling that nuclear warming and trying to like insinuate, I guess, that the biggest threat that we have as humanity, as the United States, is the prospects of nuclear war, which I would agree we are way too close for that to comfort, obviously. But, he's talking about nuclear war while simultaneously trying to downplay the long-range effects of climate change. I mean, I just covered on this channel just a couple of weeks ago on this channel the most recent IPCC report that came out, which is basically the last report, the serious report that we are going to get on climate change before we pass through this window of trying to, push back against the most disastrous effects from climate change. And he turns around and he says, I'm actually an environmentalist because what? Because you're preventing nuclear war or something like that, I guess, is the argument that he's trying to make, while also simultaneously doubling and tripling and quadrupling down on fossil fuel usage, which is what's driving the planet towards this precarious position with climate change. I mean, again, none of this makes any fucking sense whatsoever. I mean, obviously that's kind of Donald Trump's MO at this point, but at the same time, it's like, can people watching this, I mean, I'm honestly genuinely curious, like, can people who are watching this interview live understand what he's actually trying to say here? Because I can't really make that much sense of it, but it seems like he's just kind of like pushing through at full speed, expecting that people are going to be able to follow his train of thought here. Okay, so let's see if we can find another one here. Okay, let's see. Okay, so this one is on the Saudi regime, the incredibly authoritarian theocratic government within Saudi Arabia. I honestly haven't even seen this clip. Let's just see what he's got to say about Saudi Arabia here. Obviously, he has familial connections to Saudi Arabia. We'll get to that here in a second, but let's see what he said about this.
You take a look at Saudi Arabia. Look at what happened. They're great people. They wanted to help us. He goes over and gets a fist pump. You know what a fist pump means? Don't shake my hand because your hand's dirty. That's what a fist pump is. They got it, and they were so insulted. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Oh, I don't want to shake your hand. Let's go fist pump.
What? I mean, what? I mean, listen, this fist bump that Joe Biden did, that was something I criticized from the left because I didn't think that he should have gone to meet with Mohammed bin Salman, a guy who is committing a genocide in Yemen, who, by the way, we are funding and arming and supporting that genocide, right? But I didn't even think that a guy like Mohammed bin Salman, who's supporting a genocide, who dismembers journalists like Jamal Khashoggi, okay? I didn't think that Joe Biden should have even met with this guy, let alone continuing our relationship in the form that it is right now. Apparently, Donald Trump thinks that we should double down on that relationship and that they're great people. I mean, maybe some of the people, the actual civilians in Saudi Arabia are great people. Sure, that's fine. I would accept that as a premise. But the leadership in Saudi Arabia, the government, this theocratic, violent dictatorship, they're not great people. I mean, I don't know what stretch of an imagination you could possibly use to make that sort of a claim. I mean, this is coming from the same guy who assassinated a top Iranian general, Qasem Soleimani, okay? While he was on this trip to Iraq, he straight up assassinated an Iranian general, okay? A guy who was on the ground fighting ISIS. All right, he assassinates that guy and says, "Oh, he's this terrible, dictator. He's or this terrible terrorist, right, on the global stage, and he's a threat to the United States. We got to take him out." But then you look at somebody like Mohammed bin Salman, and suddenly he's like a great guy, I guess. So that's Donald Trump's position on Saudi Arabia. Now, again, obviously, as a reminder, Donald Trump's own family, especially Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, have direct multi-billion-dollar connections with the Saudis, okay? Remember that story that we covered where Jared Kushner was getting like $2 billion from the Saudi investment fund, that even the people who are running the investment fund were like, what the fuck are we giving this guy money for? He's not qualified. This isn't a solid investment opportunity for us. And then the government of Saudi Arabia overrode that decision, and they were like, no, we need to cozy up to these people, right? I mean, obviously, we see all of the corruption, the Live Golf tournament that Donald Trump was a part of in connection with the Saudi government. I mean, this is just like brazen corruption, the connections with his hotels, obviously, that the Saudis were staying in and that he was making a bunch of money off of. I mean, we all know this, right? But now I want to get to the, one of the biggest things that Donald Trump said during this entire interview, which is the Nord Stream pipeline. So let's see if we can find that one here real quick. All right, so we got the clip pulled up here. Let's just go ahead and see what Donald Trump's take is on the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipelines here.
Blow up the Nord Stream pipeline.
I don't want to get our country in trouble, so I won't answer it. But I can tell you who it wasn't, was Russia. How about when they blamed Russia? They said Russia blew up their own pipeline. You got a kick out of that one, too. It wasn't Russia.
Okay. So that's kind of a shortened clip from what I saw before, but I mean, listen, in terms of like whether or not the United States was directly involved in blowing up the Nord Stream pipelines, I've talked about Seymour Hersh's reporting, I've talked about some of the other mainstream reporting that we've gotten on the Nord Stream pipeline. I actually saw a recent piece that was posted by the New York Times on the refusal from Lula da Silva down in Brazil to supply some of this ammunition to Ukraine in their defense efforts, and they actually made the insinuation that, and this was according to like top officials behind the scenes, anonymous top officials within the US government, that Brazil is somehow like pro-Russia by voting to investigate the Nord Stream pipeline explosion. I saw another Washington Post opinion report that came out on their site that was basically alleging that any investigation into who blew up the Nord Stream pipeline wouldn't deliver any positive results, so we shouldn't investigate it because that will only like fracture the coalition that is supporting Ukraine. I mean, it's completely fucking deranged. I mean, listen, at this point, with all of the cover-ups that we have seen, with all of the reports we've seen coming out of the US media and the US government themselves, with what the evidence actually is on the ground, the shaky evidence that we do have at our disposal, I mean, again, I stand by my initial analysis of that situation. It was almost certainly a US-backed operation. Now, maybe you had some other countries that were participating in this. Maybe, you had Ukrainian saboteurs that were a part of this process, but it seems like you could pretty confidently say the US had something to do with it. And he's honestly not wrong, Trump, to suggest that Russia didn't blow up their own pipeline. I mean, we've seen the reports that Russia, almost immediately after, was trying to get estimates in terms of how much it would cost to repair the pipelines. Okay, so it seems like it's pretty much certain at this point that the US had something to do with it. So on that front, he's not necessarily wrong. But on the rest of this interview, what the fuck? I mean, what the fuck is going on? We're talking about how climate change is not real, how people who were standing outside of your arraignment were crying and pissing and shitting their pants because they loved Daddy Trump and they were so terrified to see you get arrested and, have to face some sort of accountability for the numerous crimes that you have committed over your career. I mean, what are we really talking about here? I mean, this interview was honestly an absolute joke. And, at the end of the day, it's also obviously hilarious that it's Tucker Carlson doing this interview, somebody who we know for a fact, according to those leaked Dominion text messages, absolutely despises Donald Trump as much as anybody else.
Everyone is saying good Politic guy has the best Politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying